Good morning. I'd like to thank all of you for coming out here and giving us an opportunity to speak to you. My name is Dr. Zuhdi Jasser. I'm the president of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy and a co-founder of the American Islamic Leadership Coalition. We're a group of patriotic North American Muslims standing here today in support of the NYPD. We're longtime activists, journalists, authors, heads of American Muslim organizations in the U.S. and Canada. Some of you may not have heard of us before, because we don't spend our days trying to figure out how to generate grievances against the bravest people in America like the NYPD. And we don't fire off press releases every time we give a lecture or have a meeting with Homeland Security, FBI, or counterterrorism units. There are many American Muslims here today that'll be available to you to talk to afterwards. In the interest of time, I'm going to give a few comments, and then I'll be followed by Tarek Fatah from the Muslim Canadian Congress, Manda, Zand, Ervin of the Alliance for Iranian Women, Holland Taylor of Lib for All, and then Congressman Chairman King from New York. We're proudly joined, as we have all along, by a broad swath of diverse Americans who've helped us generate a platform to tell America that there are genuine anti-Islamist Muslims that exist. And we want to thank Deb Burlingame and Tim Sumner, 9/11 Families for a Safe and Strong America, Congressman Fred Grandy with the Center for Security Policy, Beth Galinsky with the Council of Jewish Affairs, Jack Coughlin with NYPD Superior Office Association, and Tim Brown, the bravest former FDNY, and Chairman Peter King, whose courage in the development of the radicalization hearings on Homeland Security has allowed us to come together, and many of us came together after those hearings and the attention it got. We are all Muslims, some from New York, some from across the nation in Canada, that have been compelled to come here after the relentless and unfair pummeling that the NYPD has been getting in the media. We are here as American Muslims that did not toe the line of the Islamist groups, CARE, Council on American Islamic Relations, the Muslim Public Affairs Council, and all these groups that are put forth as somehow de facto representatives of the American Muslim community and not giving us the platforms to allow diversity within our community and other Muslims exist. We are not here to criticize the NYPD, but rather to thank them for doing a lot of the work that we as Muslims should be doing, which is monitoring extremism, following extremism, and helping counter the ideologies that create radicalization in our communities. There is no one voice for the American Muslim community. There are many voices. We don't ask to take away the free speech of any Muslims, but rather that we be given equal platforms in our communities. The groups that have been the grievance-mongering groups, especially in the last few months, have been given an unbalanced platform by the New York Times and the Associated Press and the NYU Brennan Center, as if their grievances represent all Muslims. It is quite offensive to many of us as Muslims to see the titles on the headlines, American Muslims upset with the NYPD, American Muslims feel they're being spied on. These are all collectivist mindsets that say that all Muslims believe that we're afraid of the police, and that's just not true. And by the way, if there's case evidence to show that there have been wrongdoing by the NYPD, we stand behind them being corrected, and we do not give up any of our civil rights. But there's been no single case presented in all of the pummeling that the NYPD has been getting, but simply investigative reporting. We stand behind transparency in police work. We do not feel that Americans, in no way do we want to be spied on, but this is not about spying. It's about monitoring and public programs. And as many have said, and as Commissioner Kelly said, it stands behind the allowances that the Hanshu decision allowed in New York and elsewhere. And we as Muslim Americans do not sacrifice any of our constitutional rights as guaranteed by the U.S. Constitution and the Bill of Rights. But we also recognize that if you look at arrests for terrorism, of the last over 200 arrests, over 80% have been from Muslims. And yet we're only 1.5% of the population. So it's rather denial to not recognize that we have a responsibility to root out their radicalization. To ignore the problem within our own family is to ask for this kind of surveillance. And the more we ignore the problem, the more it divides America and divides us between a religious conflict. And I would tell you that these Islamist groups that claim to speak in our behalf are actually political groups that in the Middle East would be considered like the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a political party and not a religious spiritual group. And we ask you to be a little more discerning on those issues. When you ask about the Muslim Student Association, why should the NYPD be interested in them? Are you aware that many of the MSAs were progeny of the Muslim Brotherhood, a fact laid out in the film that's been much maligned, that was simply shown at the NYPD in their training that I narrated. And yet the NYPD called, the New York Times called it a hate film, basically saying that I, as a devout, observant Muslim, am somehow generating hate movies about a faith that I love and I raise my children to believe in. And yet the MSA, if you look at organizations that we talk about in the film, has generated over 12 leaders that have been arrested and convicted on terror charges, including Imam Awlaki, who was rightly targeted by our military and killed in Yemen, and many others that have been radicalized. The MSA in its Western Conference ended its chant by saying that we will die to establish Islam, quote unquote. These are problems that need to be addressed in America, and we as Muslims are standing here before you to tell you that we're here to address these problems, and we're not embarrassed or shy to take responsibility. We recognize that we as Muslims need to be part of that solution, and if we target all of Islam or all of Muslims, that actually is going to be more of a problem. But we also recognize that you can't collectivize us into all being grievance-mongering groups. And I would say, if you look at the Third Jihad, also look at movies like The Act of Valor. Here's a movie about Navy SEALs, the greatest heroes in the United States, that actually says the same thing. How they went after Islamic terrorists in Afghanistan and elsewhere. So these are not racism, these are reality films. As a Syrian American, my heart and prayers are with the people of Syria, who have been fighting a true oppressive police state. And you see every day what the realities of an oppressive police state can do to a people. And for any Muslims in this country that celebrate and cherish the freedom that we can practice our faith more freely here than anywhere else in the world, that's the difference between a country that has a police state and a country that has the brave police like the NYPD that keep us free. In ending, I want to use one of Commissioner Kelly's comments recently, where Commissioner Kelly said to a group just a few days ago, anyone who intimates that it's unlawful for the police department to search online, visit public places, or map neighborhoods has either not read, misunderstood, or intentionally obfuscated the meaning of the Hanshu guidelines. A broad base of knowledge is critically important to our ability to investigate terrorism. It was precisely our failure to understand this context in 1993 that left us vulnerable in 2001. We Muslims should be building think tanks and databases of our own communities if we are to fear for our children and the ideas that radicalize our communities, rather than the very leaders that do this work for us, such as the NYPD. And I would submit to you that the more we overblow the monitoring of Muslim communities, the more that will serve to radicalize Muslims and separate them from the community, rather than to see them as supporting America and supporting these programs to counter the ideas that radicalize our faithful. So for those of you who've asked, where are the responsible Muslims? Here we are. We exist. We just don't make headlines by grievances against the police and others, and we ask you to at least give us equal time in the media and in the attention to these issues. And I thank you for your time. I'd now like to introduce Tarek Fatah from the Muslim Canadian Congress.
Good morning. I come from your neighbor north of the border, and I bring message from the Muslim Canadians over there who feel that the NYPD have been above all one of the main fighters against anti-terrorism throughout this continent. This is the city where the enemy hit, and this is the city where Muslims have come together to say that you will not attack the NYPD in the name of Islam. We are Muslims. We never gave you the right to speak on our behalf. For the New York Times and the liberal press and the bleeding heart liberals who claim that they are speaking on behalf of victimized Muslims, we in Canada say that American Islamist organizations have set up camp north of the border. American Islamist organizations like CARE, like ISNA, like the MSA, the organizations that have produced hate against Western civilization, are today working north of the border. That is why we as Muslim Canadians have come to New York to tell you that we value what the Americans have done. We value the United States of America as a beacon of freedom, liberty, and democracy around the world. There is much to be improved about the USA, but it will be Americans who love this country and its allies who will do it, not the hate mongers of the Muslim Brotherhood who have sworn to undermine the very civilization that today makes it possible for you and me to interact without fear. In Toronto, the Toronto 18 terrorists all came with background of the Muslim Students Association. The woman convicted of terror, the biochem scientist from Pakistan, Afia Siddiqui, was a product of the MSA. Avlaki was a product of the MSA. And I suggest to you that the main victims of the Islamists are we, the Muslim North Americans, whose children are subject to the propaganda and hate on campuses. It is our children, it is Muslims who are the victims of Islamists. And if there is the New York Times reporter over here, I'd like to tell him, sir, for goodness sake, don't speak on my behalf as if I'm a victim. I am not a victim. I came to North America to savor the freedom, the democracy, the liberty, the gender equality, the same-sex rights that you as Americans have worked for the last 300 years to give to the rest of the world. Do not let these Islamists fool you by their cute smiles and their behavior that suggests to them that they are civil libertarians. They are not. We don't know any one of them who was involved in the civil rights movement today. The MSA should rightfully be investigated and seen by the NYPD. If not for America, it is for the Muslims, because we are their main victims, whether it is in Egypt, whether it is in New York, or whether it is in Toronto. The fight is between Islam and Islamism. The fight is not between Islam and America. And we are on the side of the United States of America, its government, its police forces, and those who undermine the NYPD. Trust me, they are the enemies of freedom, liberty. They may not say so, but their hidden message is very clear. It is that evidence produced in the Dallas terror trial that said about the Muslim Brotherhood meeting in 1991 that said our goal is to destroy Western civilization. My message to the Muslim Brotherhood, it ain't gonna happen, because we Muslims are gonna fight for America and the liberty that we have sought over here. Thank you very much.
I'd like to now introduce Manda, Zand, and Ervin with the Alliance for Iranian Women.
Good morning, everybody. I ran away from Islamists who took over my homeland, Iran, 32 years ago, and I would not allow it to take over America. When Islamists emigrate to America, the women are secretly hoping that they and their daughters will be supported and protected from the domination of Islamist patriarchal hierarchy and their Sharia laws, that they will be treated equally under the protection of the American laws. But what they have experienced has been the opposite. Unfortunately, the American feminists and elites have decided to support the Islamist abusers of the women the women who are treated as an incubator for their children, that their lives aren't worth much. Academia has chosen to stay above the phrase of the realities and the mainstream issues and given platform to anyone referred by the Muslim Brotherhood and care organizations or universities, because our universities, after all, are being financed and receiving tens of millions of dollars every year from the petrodollar countries, Muslim countries in the Middle East. And everyone is tiptoeing around the issue of Islamism instead of talking to the Muslim Americans who are living their lives and they are happy for the freedom that they have been given in this country. In many states, American lawmakers have given into the pressure of few Islamist men demanding application of Sharia laws for themselves and their families, so they can continue beating their wives up. Some judges have discriminated against Muslim women, and they have given in to the demand of Muslim men, and they have allowed them to be under Sharia law instead of American law, and therefore abuse their wives and children. The only sincere friend that American Muslim women have had has been the law enforcement of America. The people who have supported and they have saved the lives of Muslim women in America, regardless of politics, religion, or ideology. And that is the one reason that Islamist organizations are aiming their attacks at NYPD to make an example of them and put the fear of Islamist revenge in the hearts of America's law enforcement, who have not succumbed to their demands. Thank you, NYPD, for your unquestioning, selfless service, and peace be upon you all. Thank you.
I want to introduce now Holland Taylor, CEO of Lib for All organization based in North Carolina, which with its base also organization across Southeast Asia, founded by the former president of Indonesia, President Wahid.
As Zuhdi mentioned, the co-founder of our organization was not only the former president of Indonesia, but the former head of the Nahdlatul Ulama. It's the largest Muslim organization in the world, with over 50 million followers and over 14,000 madrasas in Southeast Asia. I'd like to say to you this morning that an ideology of religious hatred, supremacism, and violence underlies and animates Islamist terrorism. Those who adhere to this ideology claim that the ideology itself represents the true teachings of Islam. The NYPD recognizes this fact. The NYPD has had the courage to publicly state this fact. The NYPD acts upon this fact in seeking to prevent further terrorist attacks upon this country, just as security officers in Indonesia and elsewhere in the world do the same thing. This makes the NYPD a target of those who sympathize with or adhere to Islamist ideology. It is a great shame that in the city of New York, the New York City Police Department has been far more vigorous in identifying the ideological factors that underlie and animate terrorism than our own federal government has done. As all of us here know, religion can be either a blessing or a curse to humanity, depending on whose interpretation of religion is at stake. If we look at the history of Europe, we look at the history of Christianity in Europe, 800 years ago, you had the Grand Inquisitor and you had St. Francis. And these are two different understandings of Christianity, and they had entirely different consequences for the people living in the societies of Europe at the time. Unfortunately, the reality is that today, due to Islamist ideology and the politicization of religion in the Muslim world and Muslim societies, the role of the Grand Inquisitor remains alive and well. We do no favor to Muslims by denying this fact. Zuhdi asked me to mention today a book which President Wahid and other top spiritual leaders in Indonesia had written in 2009, which influenced the national elections in Indonesia. It's called The Illusion of an Islamic State. And I'll read you President Wahid's conclusion from this book. Basically, it identifies the systematic infiltration of Indonesian society by transnational extremist groups which are seeking to overthrow a traditional, pluralistic, and tolerant understanding of Islam in Indonesia and replace it with the same kind of intolerance and oppression that we see in various parts of the world, dominated by the Taliban, dominated by Al-Qaeda when it was in Iraq, dominated by Hamas in Palestine, and dominated by those who have a political ideology and seek to use Islam to fulfill a worldly agenda. President Wahid's conclusion to his introduction to this book, his introduction he entitled "The Enemy Within," referring to within the Muslim community itself. And as he said, people who are convinced that they know more than anyone else about Islam and yet are full of hatred towards any of God's creatures who do not travel the same path as they, and those who claim to be in possession of the absolute truth, and for that reason entitled to act as God's vice-regents on earth, or caliphs, and to dictate how everyone else must live. Clearly, their words and behavior will not lead us into the presence of God. Their dream of an Islamic state is merely an illusion, for the true Islamic state is not to be found in the structure of any government, but rather in hearts which are open to God and all His creatures. This is the philosophy that animates the majority of Muslims throughout the world. This is the philosophy and the understanding of Islam that motivates most Muslims in North America, but it's not what you hear in the media every day. We have gathered here together to bring this message to America, to the world, that Muslims care about humanity, that the primary message of Islam is universal love for all of creation, and those who propagate an ideology of hatred rightly deserve condemnation from all of us. I'd like to just give you a copy of this.
Thank you.
Thank you. And lastly, I'm going to have Samir Abdelkhalek introduce Chairman King, and I just want to say personally, this rally and this press conference, we decided we wanted to do in one of our conference calls. And last week when I was in Washington, I stopped by Chairman King's office and I asked him if he would join us, because a lot of his work has provided the platform in which we all met. And I'll tell you that we would not be able to do this without the courage of not only officers in the NYPD, but Chairman King. Samir, who I'm going to introduce to you, is a product of our Muslim Liberty Project for Youth. That's part of the American Islamic Forum for Democracy. And he's been accepted to all 5 military academies and can give you sort of a different story from what the Muslim Student Association does. And I've asked him to introduce Chairman King.
Good morning. My name is Samir Abdelkhalek. My family and I live in Staten Island, New York, and we are American Muslims. We are proud to be affiliated with the organizations represented by the American Islamic Leadership Coalition. I want to thank them all for paving the way for our generation to take back ownership of our love for America as Muslims. As a New Yorker, I want to make it clear that every time I pray, I thank God for the bravery of our police department and the protection that our NYPD provides for us. It is my distinct honor to introduce the Chairman of the House Committee on Homeland Security, Chairman Peter King of New York. Thank you very much for being here.
Thank you. First of all, it's great to be here, and I especially want to thank Samir. Here is a young man who really personifies the American dream. He's from an immigrant family. He's a Muslim American. And he's been accepted to all of our service academies. This, to me, epitomizes what America is all about. So, Samir, thank you very much. Thank you. It's a great honor for me to stand today with these Muslim leaders, all these Muslim leaders who have come here today to personify what I believe is the real face of Islam in America. I want to especially thank Dr. Zuhdi Jasser for the courageous work that he's done over the years, for being... Here's a man who has served our nation and our armed forces, a man of great medical experience and ability, but most of all, a person who has really put himself on the line, defending what he believes is true Islam, which is a love for America with a proud respect and love for his own religion. And I, on a personal level, want to thank Dr. Jasser, because when I held the first radicalization hearing last March into the American Muslim community, the very first witness we had at the very first hearing was Dr. Jasser. And that just set the tone. A man with guts, a man with courage, and a man with great insight and knowledge. Now, I am especially proud to stand here today on behalf of the NYPD and Commissioner Ray Kelly. There is no law enforcement agency, there is no one at all in this country that has done more to protect Americans of all religions than the NYPD. It is the foremost counterterrorism force in the United States today. And it is absolutely disgraceful that the New York Times, the Associated Press, other elements of the politically correct media have allowed themselves to be used by groups such as CARE. And I just wish once, this is the Council on American Islamic Relations, just once, the New York Times or the Associated Press, instead of calling CARE a Muslim civil rights organization, will refer to them as what they are, unindicted co-conspirators in the most major terrorist financing case in the United States. That's what CARE is. And yet, when you read the papers and you read the reports, it's anti-NYPD. The NYPD is not spying. The NYPD is carrying out effective surveillance. If they were not doing what they are doing, to me, they would be negligent and they'd be remiss in their duties. This city has been attacked twice, two major attacks. 1993, the attack came from New Jersey. 2001, we know about the 19 hijackers that attacked our city and the Pentagon. Ray Kelly and the NYPD have sworn never ever to allow an attack against this city again. There's been 14 attacks stopped, primarily because of the NYPD. And I can tell you, as chairman of the Homeland Security Committee, as a member of the Intelligence Committee, the only member of Congress who is on both committees, no one is doing more to stop terrorism than the NYPD. What they are doing with their counter-terror force, with their intelligence units, is what all police departments should be doing at all levels of government. And thank God that Ray Kelly is not backing down to the political correct media. Thank God that Ray Kelly and the NYPD are still being aggressive and preemptive, because it's the job of the police department not to pick up the bodies if the attack has been launched and carried out, but to stop those attacks from happening. And you're not going to stop an attack unless you have intelligence. You get intelligence from within the community. And, you know, it's such political hypocrisy when you think that, for instance, in the years when the government was going after the mafia, they went to the Italian-American community. I'm Irish-American. When they were going after the Westies, they went into the Irish-American community, because that's where the threat was coming from. The fact is, the overwhelming majority of Muslim Americans are outstanding Americans, but the threat to our civilization today comes from that small minority within the Muslim American community. And thank God that Ray Kelly is working to make sure that we find out who they are, and thank God we have people like Dr. Jasser and others who are willing to stand with the NYPD, stand for America against radical terrorist Islam, and all of us can stand together as Americans to do all we can to make sure that this city is never attacked again. Let me just say on a personal note, 45 years ago, my father was the NYPD and he trained Ray Kelly. So I'm sure if you asked him who he did a better job of training, me or Ray Kelly, he would say Ray Kelly, because what he is doing today is really standing up for us, protecting all of us. Thank God. Let's give a medal to Ray Kelly, and let's denounce the New York Times and the Associated Press for what they are, left-wing rumor mongers carrying out the work of CARE. Thank you very much.
Thank you. We're open.
Especially since there's been so much attention to the third jihad film, and all the stories recently saying that it was played over and over in training sessions. Have you been receiving more threats now because of that?
Well, it's interesting. I'm glad you asked that. If you look at Memory, which catalogs a lot of the threats around the world, a jihadist group claimed and told the Syrian opposition groups to avoid me because I have supported the American military abroad, because I criticized American Muslims who do not want to serve in the armed forces, and basically told Syrian opposition, who I've been defending, who I've been a part of helping them create a platform to counter the Assad regime, and yet the jihadists on their Al-Qaeda website taking some of the excerpts from pieces on the third jihad that it was a hateful film, taking excerpts from pieces that said that I was part of the enemy against Muslims and Islam, and use that to basically threaten me. And you know, at the end of the day, though, if we can't speak up in America, I might as well be living in Syria. So it's not gonna make us quiet. The threats will come, and I'll tell you, this is one of the things I hope that many of these Islamist groups that call us Uncle Toms or call us, you know, all these pejoratives, because they don't want to deal with the message. And we welcome criticism of the third jihad if they want, but facts. Criticize the substance of the movie. The New York Times ran 3 or 4 stories just about the film and never called me. never once called me to ask me about the facts in the film. So if they want to criticize a film, talk about the facts in it, the documents we talk about, the organizations, etc. But rather they simply dismiss it and do the same thing of what Al-Qaeda did, which is say that we're not Muslims. This whole coalition signed a press release and a statement supporting the film and the facts behind the film. So yeah, we get some threats, but that's part of the price of freedom.
Congressman, there's no limitations on asking people. There's no limitations on open surveillance. There's no limitations on going through websites. This is all public access information. And to me, this is what's done anytime you're trying to preempt criminal activity. Obviously, if we're talking about searches and seizures, if we're talking about wiretapping, all that requires court order. But as far as carrying out investigations, surveillance, trying to obtain information, the NYPD, I'm not aware of any abuses whatsoever. I think they've done an outstanding job. And so I would say for those who have legitimate criticisms to make, let them make them. And again, I would emphasize what the director of the FBI has said time and again, that he stands with the NYPD.
Congressman, we know in the past a number of terrorists have connected to terrorists in the case of mosques. How can you guarantee the rights of honest citizens in their mosques so that they're not violating basic constitutional rights when we are defending against terrorism?
Well, first of all, it is essential that we defend our city against terrorism, that we defend our region against terrorism, and the New York City, Long Island, Northern New Jersey region is the #1 terrorist target in the country. That I can tell you from every analysis I've seen, that we are the #1 target. To me, you have the right, if you have reason to believe, if you have information that whether it's in a mosque, whether it's in a community center, whether it's in a business or whatever, that there's criminal activity being planned, that surveillance is legitimate. Legitimate surveillance, people in the community, if they want to report what they see, which could be criminal or suspicious, they should do that. That is not violating a constitutional right. If you are in a place legally, if you're in a facility legally and you're obtaining information, that is good police work. And I don't think any Muslim at all, I know that no Muslim in this area, or no Christian and no Jew or any non-believer has anything to worry about from the NYPD. They had to protect them. And as Dr. Jasser and others here have said today, that what the NYPD is doing is protecting Muslims from evil people within their communities, just as the NYPD has done with other communities, whether it's the mob, whether it's gang-related organizations, whether it's other terrorist organizations. That is the job of the NYPD. If they were not doing what they're doing, they would be criminally negligent in their duties.
That's true. Congressman, do you think that in all these cases where perhaps the NYPD was recruited in Yale and other outside locations, or it's here that there was a reasonable belief that there was some kind of criminal activity?
Well,
just there to check it out?
If the NYPD is involved, there had to be some reasonable belief. And again, I think the world changed on September 11th, and law enforcement had to learn this lesson. The FBI had to learn it, the NYPD had to learn it, is that unlike previous law enforcement, where there's a crime and you try to track it down, now you have to look for suspicions. You have to look to see where it might be. And you're not always going to have gold-plated evidence. And as several of the speakers have said, for instance, with the Muslim Student Association, there have been a number of terrorist activities that have originated from the Muslim Student Association. And I think some of these university deans and presidents, they can afford to be in their ivory tower. They're being kept safe by groups like the NYPD. They can afford to sit back and criticize. The fact is that the enemy, and it's an Islamist enemy, can be found in universities, can be found in mosques, it can be found anywhere. And that's the job of the NYPD and other law enforcement agencies, to track down leads, suspicions, wherever they are. Most of them probably amount to nothing, and that's why it's important not to get frustrated, to keep trying and trying. And the fact is, there's been 13, 14 plots against New York that have been stopped by the NYPD. I can tell you, following up on what you're saying, also the question from Tiwa Chan on the mosques, there's a number of mosques on Long Island. We had a young man, Venus, who was captured in Afghanistan fighting alongside Al-Qaeda, who belonged to 2 mosques on Long Island. We had the Times Square bomber, had picked up cash in a parking lot in a Dunkin' Donuts in Suffolk County. So, I mean, this is not the usual normal type of crime that we've had to face in the past. This is terrorists working from within.
And I want
Congressman.
Actually, Dr. Jasser would say. No,
I want to add one thing. As a Muslim, I want to tell you that I think it's important to remember what we're talking about good police work, if you talk to neighborhoods where gangs may exist, etc., police go to the neighborhood, they talk to the homes, they get to know the families, they get to know the businesses. We do that anyway in every neighborhood in the country. So at the end of the day, how is this any different if they're getting to know the Muslim communities? We as Muslims, our mosques are open. We welcome everybody to come in, learn about Islam, learn about our community. Our imams are open book. We actually, part of what our programs has been doing is to videotape sermons and criticize them publicly. So how does that become something that all of a sudden, if they happen to be a police officer, we worry that they're spying on us? And you know, when I see interviews and media interviewing Muslims who say, oh, now we're being spied on, it's like living in a Middle Eastern country. I mean, that is just creating a climate of fear that is really not the Islam that I learned, and isn't really, I think, the neighborhood type police work that we all want to have police among us, so that we can feel that if we get threatened, etc., we can reach out to them as part of our neighbors.
Congressman, can you describe some of the terrorist acts that have originated with the Muslim Students Association?
Actually, the NYPD put out a list of 11 to 12 last week, and I would refer you to that. There's, I think, 11, 12 different incidents that were described.
Yeah.
Imam,
have you
yeah.
read the Associated Press's stories on this? They're very disturbing allegations.
I would say the stories are disturbing, not the allegations. I would say the fact.
What allegations?
The Associated Press, it was virtually everything they've said has been one side of a story. For instance, there was story after story about the NYPD involved in spying with the CIA. That was discussed in detail by the Associated Press. What they failed, in a really cowardly way, what they failed to do was, so when the CIA investigated that, the independent inspector general for the CIA investigated and said that the NYPD fully complied with every provision of law, every executive order. General Petraeus went on national television to say that the NYPD and its relations with the CIA acted 100% legally and correctly. I didn't see the Associated Press putting that in their headlines.
So in your committee, you're not going to be investigating what they're reporting?
My committee investigates where there's wrongdoing. The Associated Press has not shown one instance of wrongdoing by the NYPD. Absolutely not.
The demographics unit, are you aware of them focusing on any other ethnic group or nationality other than Muslim?
I'm aware that the NYPD over the years, whether it involves religion or ethnic groups or whatever, will look to where the terror comes from, where the crime comes from. And I do know of other instances, which I'm not going to go into. Commissioner Kelly can if he wants to, but obviously there are different type of terror, different type of crimes that are unique to certain ethnic groups at this time in our history, and they are certainly looked at by the NYPD. And with all, I'm not going to disclose, let Commissioner Kelly do it. I'm just telling you that it is solid police work, and it is done not just involving Muslim Americans. It happens across the country with good law enforcement. If you see a threat coming from a particular group, and I'll go back to several years ago because those investigations are now pretty much over. The Westies, the Irish American community, was the community that was looked at for that, and rightly so. Commissioner Kelly, I'm not going to go into what Commissioner Kelly wants to tell you. He can tell you where, if he wants to, where there are different operations being carried out. I can assure you, if they get any information at all that there's any threat coming from any particular community, obviously they will have surveillance in that community.
Congressman, the media has also criticized the NYPD for the stop and frisk policy. Do you think that's another example of biased reporting?
Absolutely. Stop and frisk policy of the NYPD has reduced murders by 70 to 80% over the last 20 years. And the fact is that there are thousands of young people in minority communities who are alive today because of the stop and frisk policy, and they should be the ones thanking, and many of them are, thanking the NYPD for that policy, for taking guns away from murderers on our streets.
Last question.
Congressman, Governor Christie has been critical of the NYPD for not telling He's called it arrogant. Do you think the NYPD should have shared that information?
Well, I have great regard for Commissioner Kelly. I have a great regard for Governor Christie. We've had exchange of words over the last several days. All of us should be on the same team. And in virtually every instance, Commissioner Kelly has provided full information to New Jersey. For instance, in the case of Newark police, Commissioner Gary McCarthy, when the NYPD went in there, they contacted Director McCarthy first, and they actually had Newark police escort the NYPD police when they came over. I know there is a program now, Operation Sentry, which the NYPD is involved with Jersey police and law enforcement on. And I think this is a matter that can be resolved between Governor Christie and Commissioner Kelly. I think we're talking about really a few instances, and I think between the two of them, that can be worked out, and I'm confident, hopefully, it can be.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Thanks.
We should discuss that issue.
We'd like to thank all of you. Thank you for coming.